Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be going over the basic timeline for the stages of healing and also the stages of rehab. And then a little later on in the video, we'll talk more about the interventions that you can do during each stage. So we'll start off with thinking about the stages of healing. If we look at the top half of this timeline, so pretend that day one is when the person suffers the injury. So then for the next 4 to 6 days, they're going to be in the acute or inflammatory phase. So you can expect to see those 5 cardinal signs of inflammation: pain, heat, swelling, redness, and then loss of function in the area. So that's for about the first, week or so until about day 6. And then the next phase of healing they're gonna enter is the subacute or proliferation phase. It can also be called the repair or healing phase. And then that can go on for up to about 6 weeks until 42 days in. But the key thing that we want to think about is that starting at around day 14, those fibroblasts are going to lay down immature collagen fibers. So during that time, we can start to gently stress the tissue in a controlled manner in order for the healing to be correct long term. So that's something to think about. And then the timelines of the phases kind of overlap a little, but generally speaking, the chronic phase can start on day 21. The chronic phase could also start at day 60, but the next phase is going to be that chronic phase where now the collagen fibers are going to mature. Everything is going to kind of settle into place and start to become what it's going to become long term. So that's important because we don't want it to settle into place incorrectly. And that chronic phase can last for months. So that's the basic general idea of the phases of healing. So now for the phases of treatment or phases of rehab or stages of rehab. For the first week, we're going to be in that maximum protection phase, kind of while, just the inflammation is going on. Then day 7 to day 21, it's going to be in the moderate protection or controlled motion phase, where we do want to start stressing the tissue a bit, but in that controlled manner. And then after day 21, during the chronic phase, we're going to be in the return to function rehab stage. So during that time, we can definitely start to introduce more aggressive treatments to the patient. So I'll just talk a little bit more about specific interventions that we can do during each stage of rehab. During the first week after injury, so that max protection phase, you want to think about the acronym PRICE, which is going to stand for protection, rest, ice, compression, and elevation of the injured area. So really not doing too much, hence max protection. But you can start to introduce just passive range of motion to the injured tissue, but you definitely don't want to stretch or do anything aggressive to the tissue at this point. And then also another thing is during the max protection, you can think about modalities to manage inflammation and pain. And then when we move on to this moderate protection phase, so when the fibroblasts are going to start laying down those collagen fibers, that's when we want to start stressing that tissue a bit. So you can start stretching in this, begin active range of motion exercises, muscle endurance. So we want to gently kind of ease into stressing that tissue at this point already. And then finally, during this return to function phase of rehab, we can really ramp up what we do with the patient, just more aggressive stretching, more advanced exercises, even you can get into things like plyometrics. So really, you can just do way more, be more aggressive during this phase, while still maintaining that the patient is not experiencing too much pain or that inflammation is not picking back up again. So we still have to be careful. And that is covering the stages of healing and rehab.